Okay, so the four phases and how to react in each to come out the far side and thrive. Well, a few weeks ago, I did a kind of a predictions and practical advice session with Caffè Culture. I've done multiple interviews between then with lots of different players in the industry, not just necessarily coffee shops, but a little bit wider than that. I've also been working with a lot of clients in terms of reshaping their businesses and been changing a lot of the training that we do just to try and reflect the new situation. So I had a conversation with Paul Rawlinson via one of the Caffè Culture interviews, or the CaffèInsights interviews, and he actually came up with this four phases scenario, and I think it's pretty nailed. So what I've done is I've kind of fleshed it out, and what I want to go through today is some very specific advice in terms of what I think you need to do now, what to look forward to in terms of the next phase, and then potentially on into the future. But it's kind of all about what you need to be doing now. Okay, so phase one. Well, phase one was the lockdown. Phase one was the confusion, all the panic. It's where we didn't know whether we were going to be, what sort of level of government support. We were told to close, but what did that mean? So since then, we've had furloughs and grants and loans, and safety, of course, has been the major issue, entirely rightly. We also, of course, had a massive run on toilet roll and all sorts of weird stuff. Now, that seems almost in many ways a little bit like ancient history to me, in terms of that kind of the toilet roll panic and not being able to buy paracetamol and so on. So we have settled into sort of 8 odd weeks down the line, a slightly odd phase now, which is kind of phase two. So phase two is what's happening right now, and you basically have two choices. You stay closed for all sorts of reasons, but often because actually within your location there's actually very little you can do, or you stay closed just because you want to try and not open again until you have the all clear, or you stay open or you reopen and trade in some form. And there's all sorts of reasons why that has happened to certain people. Phase three is when we kind of are supposed to be able to open properly. There's legislation coming out today. There are proposals coming out today, in theory, where there'll be a little bit more clarity as to what that means, and it's all of the kind of the vagueness of ongoing confusion about social distancing and how are people going to sit. How is it going to work? Now we can look at what's happening in other countries that have come out of lockdown to see a little bit what that means. But, our situation here, without getting too political and all of this, stay alert. We're likely to have a lot of vagueness still. And to an extent, I don't necessarily blame the government. I think it's extremely difficult to call, but we don't quite know what's going to happen then. We kind of know what's happening now. So we're going to have this confusion, and it in my opinion, phase three is probably likely to be harder than where we are now for a number of reasons. There's likely to be much less government support. If you reopen and you're at sort of 50% turnover and the furlough stops, you're likely to have to make some redundancies, which is going to be pretty brutal. You may have to pay all your rent, and you're going to have to dig very deep into your cash flow and make some very tough decisions, because suddenly you may have a lot less revenue, and the same level of overhead that you had before. So phase three is kind of not going to be a lot of fun, in my opinion. Phase four is where we come up with this wonderful whole new normal concept, which I kind of keep trying to not say, but it's impossible for me not to say. So phase four is the new normal when we move past the social distancing, and we get back to a new settled society whereby people can go out and eat and drink and do all of the hospitality things that they want to do and whatever else in other industries. But that is going to be very different too, and there's a couple of different ways to look at it. In one way, you can look at it and go, well, there's going to be changed customer behaviour forever, and I think that's probably the case. We're going to have less offices. They're going to be more working from home, more delivery. Undoubtedly, that as a habit is going to increase. People will have got better at cooking, and therefore they're going to want to go out less. People have got much better at making coffee at home. Will they want less coffee? And we're likely to have a huge recession, and of course, value will be all. So there's a whole chunk in that list that is pretty negative. Some of it may well be true. A lot of it may be true. But what I want to try and do is look at kind of the flip side of this and think we could or should have a situation, or could also have a situation like this, where people have a desperate connection for this kind of hospitality and community again, where, yes, I say communities are stronger as a result of this. And cafes have always been able to, and should always be able to, be an integral part of this, with the obvious proviso that it depends upon your location. There may be a bonus for us in our industry as people trade down from the mid-market restaurants. That has happened before. There is likely to be less emphasis on luxury, so people are going to want to have that kind of... they're going to want to have that lower level of luxury that we can provide with a very high quality cup of coffee, just as a metaphor to an extent. More emphasis on well-being, and that could be a big advantage too in terms of if you've got space, evening classes, all sorts of people wanting to try and gather together. So looking at it from that perspective, it can go multiple different ways. We don't really know what the new normal is. And I have no gift of prophecy. I cannot read the runes. And I think it's really important to understand that nobody can. There's a lot of people out there speculating. I mean, I'm doing the same thing myself, but no, we don't really know. But what we can make is a number of predictions, and we can be very clear on what you should be doing now based upon the individual aspects of your brand, but also the way that the consumers are behaving right now. So what I know right now is that there are 7 key areas that you should be working on in your business. And that is whether you are closed or whether you are open or planning to open before the official lockdown finishes. So the first is optimism. And this isn't going to be some sort of an ongoing motivational speech, but it's really important that we have some sort of optimism in terms of how we view our businesses and how we can then move forward so that we are not drowning in the fear. Now, I do not dismiss the fear, but you have no choice. But I have lost it all in the past, as I've said before. I'm not going to labour that point. Many of my clients have in the past and pulled themselves back from it. It's not the end of the world. And I've said this before, again, I'm not going to labour the point. I take 2 of the health boxes that put me in the clinically vulnerable list, and I have a daughter in the extremely vulnerable category. So I have a client who has lost a family member, but we have to remain optimistic and keep moving forward. Can't emphasize that enough. All of that is what it is. And I come back to the Stoic thing. I'm going to do this very briefly, but this is Epictetus, who I quoted before. It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That's all that matters here now. That's what matters with your business, and that's what matters with how you then move forward, both personally and with the business. So let's get on to some more constructive stuff. Now, about 10 years ago, relatively early on in my consulting career, I put together what I called a 6-week rescue plan. And this is for a relatively large chain of businesses who had a few absolute nightmare ones that just weren't trading at all. And this whole basic 6-week rescue plan, I've still played around with in various forms over the years. I don't like to do a lot of business rescue because actually it can be very difficult, but a lot of what we're going through here now is very close to what happened in that 6-week, or what I put together in that 6-week rescue plan. And last night, I was on a kind of a virtual dinner thing with a guy called Alistair Dryber, who's a crisis manager, and he operates on an ongoing basis in short bursts as the financial director of distressed assets. And he said a very interesting thing, because he was talking about crisis management. He was talking about what he does in terms of going in and, he goes in as kind of the financial director, the accountant, to help pull those businesses together when somebody else has put in a chunk of money to try and rescue the business. And he talked about one of the first things that they look at when he's talking with investors, and then he's talking with the business that they're trying to rescue. He talks about, do they have a right to exist? And I kind of thought, it's a really interesting way to put it, because it's pretty brutal terminology, and I think in many cases we know that there's a lot of businesses out there, not just necessarily within our industry, who do not have a right to exist. A right to exist is much more than just being a good business. It's adding real value to the community. Can you as one strand, can you fundamentally say that you add real value to the community? Can you fundamentally say that you delivered what you said you were going to do when you set up, or what you really do now that you have set up? And these are kind of really honest questions. And the simple fact behind this is almost nobody does. One of my closest friends, and somebody who I've worked with within a business actually, is a guy called John Davey. He built and sold Junglers for 36 million, bought it again for £1, resold again for 11 million after he turned them into franchises. He's an extremely bright guy, runs multiple businesses doing multiple £1 million worth of turnover. And although he spends most of his time in LA now. The point is, he is so fundamentally believing of the fact that almost nobody does what they say they're going to do in business, and that nobody is honest enough with how they run their businesses. Nobody is honest enough with what the actual customer experience is like. Now, you've probably seen me do this before, but these are the 5 cornerstones that the customer judges your business on. If you haven't been through this, you need to go through this and think about a score out of 10 for each of these categories. The actual quality of your coffee, a genuine, honest score. The actual quality of your food. The quality of the environment within which people sit. The quality of the hospitality that those people you're delivering to them. And the kind of the slightly more intangible piece of that identity that you have that makes you stand out from any other coffee shops in your town or in your street. So you need to have an overall score of 40 or above. And this is a process that I go through with all clients when we start, and we go through this really honest piece in terms of scoring it. And you need to have a bit of you should have a proper navel gazing session into your business at the moment, if you're not open, to try and see what you are lacking on. The second piece, of course, is in a benchmarks way. Do you know, where are you in terms of sales with your competitors or people around you, or what you could be? Where are you in terms of your margin? Do you know your margin consistently? Is it where you want it to be? Is it what it theoretically should be? Is your wage cost what you want it to be? Nobody has a wage cost that they want it to be. But is your wage cost under control? Have you got your rotas under control? So I run this Facebook group with approximately over 1,700 coffee shop owners in it, all over the world, but about half of them are in the UK. And most people don't know these core facts. There are lots of people where it's very vibrant at the moment, but we know that lots of people in there simply do not know properly their actual cost of sales on a consistent basis, and their wage cost, and in many cases even how to do a proper rota so that they can properly you can properly then understand the cost of that labor piece, which is only going to go up on an ongoing basis. Do you know where you sit in terms of net profit versus your competitors? Are you bouncing along at 2, 3, 4, 5% EBITDA or net profit, or are you sitting at 16, 17, 18, 19? The sorts of figures that are possible in this business. So now is the time to sit there and have real honesty about customer experience, the financial piece, and then actually all the rest of it. Your staff recruitment process, your staff training, your staff retention and turnover. How well are you keeping your people? What sort of level of process do you have in place for ongoing menu development so that you keep it fresh? That's a number of my clients are completely reworking their menu at the moment because they've been so busy working on their business in the past. They now know that this is the time to kind of revisit it and open again with something fresher and new, more contemporary, that actually fits better within what's happening in their market. Your promotional processes, have you got a proper process for continuing to engage with the customer? Have you got processes in place to try and make sure that you're driving all of your average spend and so on, without going too deep into that? Solid operational processes. Now is the time to look and see all of those things that may have frustrated you in the past in terms of the business, in terms of staff not doing stuff. Now is the time to look at operational processes, perhaps redo your training, and so that when you open again, everybody understands that to an extent there is a new sheriff in town. Again, I'm working with a number of clients at the moment who are reshooting all of their training videos in their shops at the moment, just themselves and family. What about your financial management processes? Are those all in place? Now, these need to be really honest scores. I've used this metaphor before, but actually as I was sitting here doing these videos, as I often do, I turned around to check that there was nothing in the background. There's a picture of my daughter, as I always have, and she doesn't look anything like that anymore. But I noticed that my blood pressure monitor was here. So without going into a big kind of bleating, boring story, because I'm in a vulnerable group in two capacities, I I have to be really careful. And my blood pressure is on the edge of being elevated. So every single morning, I measure my blood pressure. And I have a little graph, and I watch the whole thing. And I'm doing all of these things, I just don't need to bore you with, to try and make sure that that goes under control before I would take medication. The point is, that machine doesn't lie. You know, your cholesterol readings don't lie, the scales don't lie, you know, all of those factors that a doctor will measure, they don't lie. You've got to have the same honest scores in your business, and now is the right time to look at that. Okay, so if you click the link below or wherever it is in this page, it'll take you through to a page where I'm going to give you a whole load of resources, but one of them is a business evaluation scoring process. It's a checklist box that you can give yourself scores very easily, and just by drop down boxes, so that you can see honestly where you are in these categories, and then have a process to think, actually that one is beeping up red, that's what I need to work on. So click that link below when I'm done here, and you will give you all of those resources. A few other things I'm going to give you afterwards, but that allows you to have a better way to measure that without me going through it in any more detail here. Okay, the third piece, I've done this before, cash. Alistair Dryburgh was going on about this last night. It's the thing I've been talking about for weeks now, that people need to understand the cash flow versus profit thing, and the fact that actually you must survive. We need these businesses to survive, not just for you, but for your ability to employ staff, and for your ability to pay VAT, to put taxes back into the system, to pay back into the government all of this money that has gone out. And to an extent, in many industries, and I know with some people, the furlough grants, CBILS, BBIL, bounce back loan systems have made this phase a little too easy. A number of those interviews that I've done off camera, people are saying that. They're saying that actually the government have been too generous, and this is making life a little bit difficult. So at the moment, it's actually quite easy to sit back and just breathe. Now that's, you know, to an extent, there's nothing wrong with that for a while, but that phase should be over. Now what you need to do is focus on getting the cash in, because if you've got those loans, if you've got a lot of deferred stuff, if you've got your staff furloughed, if you've got grants, you are likely to have cash and therefore no urgency to move forward. But you can't, you've got to continue to focus on the cash. This is why I keep going on about about having the cash flow, that weekly cash flow, which again I'll put in the resources via the link, although there's a previous link for that if you haven't got it. And you've got to focus on not building up more debt. Not more borrowing, not more deferring anymore, and not kind of, as few people are thinking about, well, can I get more money in? Because you're not Uber or WeWork or any of these crazy overvalued businesses that don't make money. You need to have cash coming in. You need to have some form of revenue coming in to fit those costs, so that when I'm working with anybody at the moment, first thing we do is we work out what is the burn rate of cash at the moment. And most of the time they don't know. And then when we see that it's this amount of figure, £2,000, £4,000, £5,000, depending on the business, it changes everything, because it suddenly everybody starts galloping and thinking, actually, I can't afford to burn that amount. We're going to run out of money, and then I'm going to be left with the loans. So phase 3 is going to be tougher from that perspective too. I'm absolutely convinced of it. 4 is you need to have flexibility. You need to look at everything you can do. In the past, I used to talk about real focus on the core business and being very careful about brand extensions. We are in a slightly different world now, where you need to look at everything you can do to try and generate more cash. Now, most of these interviews that I've been doing, certainly the more recent ones, have been with people who are generating cash in some form. I'll give you a very brief list, but there's a lot more than this, or multiple versions of this. You can be open for takeaway coffee only. Lots of people have started doing that. Takeaway coffee plus unique items that aren't necessarily on the menu. Takeaway plus the existing menu and unique items. Or takeaway plus grocery, which there may well not be a lot of margin on, but you're acting to an extent as a service to the community. Or delivery of your core menu, coffee delivery. Meal prep. Some people are doing really well out of meal prep. And I've got some case studies that I'll be able to show you anon. Complete meals. So complete meals, but served cold, that can then be reheated. If you have a strong enough brand, some people are doing extremely well with that too. And then all sorts of variations of online sales. It can be online sales in terms of delivery. It can be online sales in terms of click and collect. It can be online sales in terms of pushing out your brand, whether it's t-shirts or tote bags or coffee or any other aspect of merchandise or equipment. So there's lots of different things that can go on. Click the link below, because I'm going to show you in a much longer video than this 5 phase 2 case studies, none of which are in any of these interviews, and all of these people are more profitable now than they would have been. They're all trading above what their projections were going to be for this month, long before we ever knew about somebody eating a bat in China. So there are people who are getting first mover advantage, looking at opportunities and really seizing them, and actually, as long as they're safe, and I'll go through all of these case studies, and they are safe, rigorously so in some cases, there are real opportunities out there. So you've got to be flexible. Do what you can with your business, but click the link and watch that video when I get it put together. But you've got to protect your brand. You can't just decide to your brand. It kind of in the customer's eyes does various things. There's only so far you could extend your brand. You can't start just suddenly doing an online thing if that doesn't work in any way for your customers. You can't start doing takeaway necessarily if you're in an area and there's nothing but offices around you and there's nobody there. So you've got to do what works for you, your customers, your location, and the long-term viability of your brand. But having said that, you still need to be flexible and try and get cash in. So think about protecting your brand, do what you can, but in the back of your mind, check that cash flow and know that, unless you do something, it's just going to keep going down towards the red. And then you're in the category where it's going to take you years to recover, or the asset value of your business is just wiped out. You're going to have to work on for many more years. And that's already a situation for certain people. Okay, you also need some new skills, okay? The old way, as I talked about, is coffee, food, hospitality, environment, and identity, or the brand piece. That's the 5 things that we needed to concentrate on in the past from a customer perspective. As long as we could nail those 5 things, that existing business would be fine. There are people out there with very, very strong businesses in the right areas that have all 5 of those nailed. And when they reopen with a strong brand, they will be fine. Now, that may not be you. It probably isn't you, because you're probably not one of those people who's completely nailed all of those, because very, very few people are. I'm not making a judgment on you. And secondly, you may be in an area that is going to take a lot longer to come back. So now what you need to learn are 1, 2, or 3 of these. You are likely to have to go into takeaway to begin with. Now, takeaway skills, fast food rules, as it were, are actually very different from normal hospitality rules. You may or may not know I used to have chip shops in the past, doing some chip shops consulting at the moment. Fast food rules are different. I'm not saying that you suddenly start going out there and going, would you like to go large with that? It's not McDonald's, but there's a very different... The hospitality piece is much less. You still got to be hospitable, but people work, people queue and behave in a different way, and their expectations are very different in terms of takeaway. So you've got to try and learn some takeaway skills. You've got to learn retail skills more than ever. So again, one of the big advantages that I had in the past is whenever we had our garden centre cafes, I also owned the garden centres too. So we had a million and a bit of turnover in cafe sales over 2 cafes, but we had more than 2 million, well over 2 million in terms of retail sales. So I learned an enormous amount about retail. And retail skills, merchandising, using every inch, are skills that most people kind of ignore on our industry. And you've got to have very strong merchandising, because when you start your takeaway, you're also going to be a retailer. You have got to build up that average spend. If you are simply selling a cup of coffee, you will have that classic old-fashioned thing of high gross profit margin in percentages, but low gross profit margin in terms of pound notes. So percentage, the cliche has always been, you don't take percentages to the bank. The bank manager's not interested. Nobody has a bank manager these days. So you've got to put those two together. You've got to develop those skills. And thirdly, you actually have to develop some online skills. There's a lot of people, clients, ex-clients, people in my Facebook group, paid and non-paid, who are all understanding now that actually the really strong social media and that interaction with your customers is incredibly powerful. So you've got to build online skills in terms of your promotional strategies through a very distinct process to get engagement, and you've got to understand potentially some form of e-commerce, because what happens, and this isn't for now, but I'll go through this in a further piece of training. In that 4th phase, what you want is a brand that is much more resilient. Most coffee shops, last piece of research that I did in my coffee shop group, about 75% of people were still shut. So if you're in that category that you're shut and waiting to get open, you're bleeding cash, and your business is very dependent upon that one income stream, which is operating as a cafe or a coffee shop, maybe a little bit of catering or something as well. But what you want to have in the future is a much stronger, more resilient brand. A brand that has the ability to sell stuff online, that has the ability to have other additional streams of income should more crises happen again. And there may be another pandemic, there may be a second wave of this, but there are always situations such as the roadblocks, roadworks, scaffolding outside your shop, all sorts of situations, closed bridges, all sorts of things around you, which can put you into the equivalent of a crisis like this again. And this is why you need to make sure that you have a brand that has got very strong social media outreach and engagement, and that you have some sort of an ability to have income coming through some form of e-commerce. And that may even just be promoting your catering business or promoting products that you make in store or all sorts of other things like that. But I'll go through that in another training. So the 7th piece actually directly links to that, is that you've got to keep customer contact and engagement. What you will find is that a lot of your competitors will have gone quiet. They will have literally gone, and I see it all over, because obviously on Instagram and Facebook, I follow lots of different pages, and I see lots of people, and their very last post was, a closed sign in the door, and that's weeks ago now, and a closed sign in the door and an apology, wanting to keep safe, got to look after the staff, all of which is true, and that's the last post, or maybe one in between. That's very, very common. Now, the problem, as I've said before, is the problem with this is you need to keep up the engagement with your customers, so that when you open, you have continued to appear in their feed. Instagram and Facebook have an algorithm that all they care about is what the viewer, you or I, doing when we pick up our phone or look online. All they care about is what we engage with. If you haven't had any engagement, if you haven't posted anything or kept up any form of interesting engagement with your customers, you will not appear. Facebook will not, on Instagram, will not put your posts in front of your customers when you reopen. So it's a very practical thing here. Now, there's an energy piece around this if you're shut, but you need to drag that energy out now. Now I'm going to show you in one of the case studies in the video, in the 5 phase 2 case studies. I'm going to show you, if you click that link, I'm going to show you how this actually works in real life. I'm going to show you the specific example of somebody in my Facebook group who went from, they'd only been open 7 months, so a lot of the support wasn't available for this lady. But she had built up an enormously strong social media following. But when the lockdown happened, she was in complete doom. Now, a lot of us were, no judgment on that. But she was in total doom because she thought, I've done all this work. I have a young baby. I have put enormous amounts of money into this business. It's gone very well, and I stand to lose everything. And I empathize with that, obviously. But she had no option, because she wasn't getting paid, than to try and reopen again, to try and do something just herself to begin with. And she is now busier in 3 days than she was in 6 days in the past. And that's before even sort of March, or before everything started to slow down. She's doing more in 3 days than she was in 6, with 2 members of staff, and than she was doing originally with full staff. So it's very profitable. It's a transformed business. So click that link, and I'll go, and you'll watch that, but it's a case study. She does a very good job in all parts of the business. Great social media doesn't save a bad business, but it allowed her, when she opened again, to pivot, the other term that everybody's using, to pivot a little bit and come up with something that was right for the market then. But this very strong social engagement that she had meant that she was immediately able to tell everybody what she was doing. And she gets hundreds of orders every week for the stuff that she's doing, which is, I'll go through in the video, or in another piece of training. Now, one more of my 7. This is kind of cheesy consultant stuff, but I think it's kind of important, because I really believe it's like there's a little bit of this. My tone has changed a bit in terms of there is a chunk of stuff that you really need to do. And if I was acting in proper consultant mode, there are key things that I would be going through in terms of breaking down your business. But if we are, which we are, looking at rescue plans for, let's say, if you're not open and profitable with one of those things at the moment, 90% of operators out there are in some form of, how do I rescue this business? And that may be, you may feel comfortable that your cash flow will get you there in the end, but you have a whole chunk of debt, almost certainly off the back of that. Or you've used all your reserves. I mean, I have a client who's used, the only reason he's going to survive is because he's using all of the reserves that he had. Or I haven't spoken to him for a while, but initially he was using all of the reserves that he had, and he knew he'd survive because he was about to open a second shop, and all the cash was in the bank. So consultant stuff, you need to move fast. If I was coming out and doing full rescue plan stuff, if I was doing full crisis management, full how do we turnaround strategy stuff, you've got to move really fast, because I tell you what's happening at the moment. The other thing is market share is being redistributed. In one of these case studies that I'll show you, in the specific town that this guy has reopened up in again, these are his estimates. That they're speculative, but they're probably not far off the truth. He reckoned that about 1% of the local population of that town knew where he was. He's been going about 3 years, so it's a relatively young business, and it was a good business, but it was growing. And he reopened. He's come up with a very innovative way to reopen. Plus, I mean, incredibly safe. A lot more than 2 meters. In terms of contact with customers. Very clever. But he reckons now that something in the region of 15% of that local town now know who he is, because he's had local TV coverage, lots of press coverage, and also he's on a route. Nearby where people are exercising. So his brand is going to be substantially stronger when he reopens, particularly because he does a good job. Now, the other key thing is you need to move fast, because everybody else is jumping back out there again, whether it's independents or the big boys. I saw today, Nero have done a big deal with Uber Eats. Now, Nero are now going to be doing delivery. All the big boys are jumping back into the market again, whether that's just purely as takeaway, the Nero Starbucks Costa models, or nearly all of those larger competitors are open again in some form for takeaway. So the market share is going to be redistributed. And the sooner you can get open, you have that first mover advantage. But you do need to act fast now. Wagamama reopening with half of their estate as a takeaway. So the whole kind of takeaway market, those people who are doing really well in takeaway now, that's because there's very few other options at the moment. But those sales will go down. But again, according to a client and very good friend of mine who I want to do a case study on, as I say, click the link. And I agree with him. The specific line that he comes out with is, this is not going away the way that he's structuring. The thing that he's doing in his business, which is prepped meals, that's not going away. People want that. They're going to continue to want that. He has a distribution channel. He's going to have loyal customers who do not want necessarily, for example, HelloFresh with a meal prep. And just around the road, I'm going to a case study of somebody doing meal prep really successfully. And so there's a big chunk of that people are doing that are already seizing the market, that if you're closed or not quite open yet, you're going to miss out on. So there's a redistribution of where people go and how they work, regardless of how paranoid we become or stay. And as I say, you're going to start to, the reason why I use Wagamama as an example is those guys, and the Nando's and so on of this world, those really big brands, they're going to be pouring money in to make sure that they can rebuild their revenue streams as much as is possible back to where they were. And in our market, the same thing are going to happen with Starbucks, Nero, Costa, or any of those other brands, or the Pretz and so on of this world, that kind of impinge upon you. Now, there will be, undoubtedly in my local high street, we have a Carluccio's that is shut. But that whole business has already been resold. Can't quite remember who it's been resold to. But there's a lot of people out there jumping on these distressed assets. So everything's going to change around, and you've got to make sure that your business, you've been through the brutally honest piece, you've worked out where you are, you've looked at what you can do with the business, and then you've jumped back in some way safely so that you can take advantage. But you've got to do it pretty quickly. So consultant piece now. You've got to ruthlessly focus on the best way to use your time. It's very easy to be headless chicken. We were all a bit headless chicken to begin with. I was a headless chicken. But you've got to focus on the best way to use your time. And you need to focus then on doing the right things. So it's very, very easy to do stuff in your business that is not the right thing. If I was doing proper consultant stuff, I'd drag out, quadrants and show you what I mean. But basically, you've got to focus on tasks that are high impact in the short and the long term. Stuff that you can do now that will also work through into the future. What strands of income can you put in that'll get cash in now and is likely to stay in the future? Now, if you do high impact and it's just short term, that's fine, because it comes back to the cash piece. You also want to do high impact and low effort. Don't do low impact, high effort. Lots of people do that. We all do that sometimes to try and be busy. I'm saying you've got to treat this from that strong look at the tasks you've got to do. What is going to get you the benefit, the best bang for your buck? What all can you do so that you open again as profitable as quickly as possible? Now, if you can't get open before phase 3, make sure you do open with a substantially better business. Do that work. Go through my process of scoring your business and find the weak links. They're there. Everybody knows they're there. In those deep, dark moments in your mind at 3 a.m, you know the stuff that you're not doing right in the business. You've got to look at those weak links and you've got to fix them. So click the link below. I'll show you that current business evaluation scoring process. Or I'll give that to you with a video explaining how you work it. I'll also show you a new training on Monday where I'm going to do this deep dive. I haven't recorded this yet. A deep dive into all of these areas that you can do with the case studies, the 5 case studies that I'm talking about, so that you can see, oh, well, there's an idea, more than just there's an idea executed. And in some cases, I'll give you actual figures without necessarily, obviously, wanting to give away the confidence of those people. So click the link below. The third piece is I'm going to show you a checklist for what you need to do to get open now and build out any new revenue sources. This is a very, very simple checklist that it goes through all of the issues. It's in an Excel format, but it's a checkbox and then a score so that you can see the stuff that you need to do. It also has all of the links through to the government resources, because there's a whole bunch of tedious stuff that you've got to do in terms of health and safety, in terms of environmental health stuff, in terms of local council, in terms of licensing, all sorts of boring stuff. But there's a chunk within that. There's a whole separate piece in that you want to have so that you can work through, so that you can see what you can do with your brand, see what you can do in terms of those additional pieces of revenue, and make sure that when you open, you've got it all right. Also, when we get there, if you are on the list, I'll then show you checklists for phase 3 when we know what the rules are. We just don't know, but it will be very similar to what we have now, but it'll have a new set of, it'll have an extra whole category in terms of how you then cope with that social distancing piece. So in those checklists, it's a whole bunch of stuff that you've got to do in terms of your menu, whole bunch of stuff that you've got to do in terms of revisiting your merchandising, so that the two work together, a whole bunch of stuff that you've got to do in terms of then reintroducing your staffing back in. And I don't mean kind of the legal aspect, I mean training, I mean both the kind of the health and safety piece, as well as showing them this kind of new sheriff in town thing that I'm talking about. And finally, I'm going to show you a phase 4 piece of training. And this piece of training I did last week within my paid group. What it is it's 11 ways that at that phase 4, you can build this more resilient brand. It's 11 different things that you can add on so that when anything happens in the future, you have a more resilient brand. But perhaps at least as importantly as that is that actually it will dramatically increase the value of your business when you come to sell. Now, all 11 of these things cannot apply to everybody, but it's 11 ways that you can do it. And I've also worked through 6 different examples of diversified brands, some of which are huge, but all within the coffee shop industry, and some of which are down to just one location, that are very diversified, that are doing very well now, and they will also thrive in the new normal. There we are, I used it twice. Okay, so I hope that was beneficial. Click the link below. I'll get you all of the resources. I'll show you that training on Monday. And there'll be a few other pieces of training along the way so that I can try and assist you in this sort of whole process of getting back to having a profitable business with as little debt as possible.